Waverly was in the Mafia boss's office, alone, and Ryuk Shin wasn't calling security. Chanel didn't think. She didn't breathe. She blurred down the corridor, a navy blue ghost in a janitor's uniform, slipping past guards who had spent 6 months looking straight through her like she was part of the furniture. Tonight, their blindness was her weapon. She reached the heavy mahogany doors and pushed. The sight on the other side stopped the very blood in her veins. Ryuk Shin, the Shadow CEO. The man Seoul's most powerful criminals crossed oceans to avoid sitting completely frozen in his hand-carved chair, lethal hands still on the desk, while Waverly pressed a crinkled Hello Kitty sticker onto his $40,000. Patek Philippe watched and hummed the Bluey theme song like she was in her own living room. The room smelled of expensive sandalwood and the electric charge of a coming storm. Ryuk didn't look at Waverly. His dark, predatory eyes locked onto Chanel, tracking the pulse, jumping in her throat. "You're late," he said, his voice a low vibration that raised every hair on her arms. "For your daughter. And for me." In that single heartbeat, Chanel understood two things with terrifying clarity. She was not getting fired tonight, and she was never, ever being allowed to leave this man's world again. Seoul didn't care about Chanel Brooks. That was the first thing she learned when she landed at Incheon Airport 18 months ago with 2 suitcases, a 3-year-old strapped to her chest, and the kind of desperate optimism that only single mothers running from bad situations could manufacture on zero sleep. The city was beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Neon everywhere. Money everywhere. Opportunity everywhere, but somehow never quite within arm's reach. She'd left Atlanta with a plan. A cousin had promised a teaching position at an international school. The position evaporated 3 days after she arrived. The cousin stopped answering calls a week after that. What remained was rent, Waverly, and a phone bill she was already behind on. So Chanel did what she'd always done. She worked. First the coffee shop in Mapo-gu, where she smiled through 12-hour shifts and mispronounced orders in Korean that made customers wince. Then the laundry service in Yongsan, pressing shirts for businessmen who never once looked at her face. Then Shin Tower, the crown jewel of her exhausting empire, where she reported at 11 p.m. and disappeared into the building's bones until 5 a.m., cleaning floors that cost more per tile than her monthly wage. 3 jobs, 1-bedroom apartment. One very curious 3-year-old who had recently decided that rules were, in her expert opinion, more of a suggestion. Waverly was the reason for all of it. Also, occasionally, the cause of all of it. She was the kind of child who made strangers stop on sidewalks, big brown eyes that processed everything, a gap-toothed smile she deployed like a weapon, and absolutely zero understanding of the concept of danger. She touched everything, followed lights like a moth, asked questions in a hybrid language of English, broken Korean, and sounds she had simply invented herself. Chanel loved her so ferociously it was sometimes hard to breathe around it, which made the guilt sharper on nights like tonight when childcare fell through, when there was no backup plan, when the choice was bring Waverly or lose the job. She'd chosen to bring her. Hidden her in the supply closet on the 14th floor with a tablet, a juice box, a blanket, and strict instructions. Special mission, baby. You are an undercover agent. Undercover agents stay quiet and stay put. You understand? Waverly had saluted her with the juice box. Chanel had taken that as a yes. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that she had been anything but invisible inside Shin Tower. For 6 months, a camera on the 14th floor had been tracking her. Not the official security feed. A private one connected to a single monitor on the 52nd floor. Ryuk Shin had noticed her on her 3rd night, not because she'd done anything wrong, because she'd done something no one else in his building had ever done. She'd found evidence of a crime scene, a corner of the 14th floor boardroom that his men had cleaned hastily and poorly and without hesitation, without any visible panic. She had quietly and methodically finished the job, bleached the grout, replaced the rug corner, repositioned the furniture. Then she'd moved on to the next room like it was nothing. She hadn't told anyone, hadn't whispered to colleagues, hadn't reached for her phone. Ryuk had watched the footage 3 times. Then he'd pulled her employment file. Chanel Brooks, 28, American, single mother, 3 jobs. No criminal record, no connections, no agenda. Just a woman trying to survive a city that hadn't made space for her. He'd said nothing, done nothing. Just watched the way he watched everything that interested him. Quietly, completely. From a distance that felt like safety until it very suddenly wasn't. What he didn't know yet, what his surveillance hadn't told him, was that 18 months ago, a man named Gerald Webb had stood in a kitchen in Atlanta and made Chanel understand that the only way to keep Waverly safe was to disappear entirely. So she had. Soul was her disappearing act, and it had worked. Until tonight, when Waverly had dismantled it with a Hello Kitty sticker and a complete disregard for the concept of staying put. Chanel returned to the supply closet at 1:17 a.m. The blanket was folded on the floor. The juice box was empty. Waverly was gone. In her place, a trail of neon pink hair clips, one every few feet, leading down the corridor toward the executive elevator bank, like the world's smallest, most catastrophic breadcrumb trail. Chanel stared at it. Then she did the only thing a mother in that situation could do. She followed it. She found the obsidian keycard on the floor near the elevator, sleek, unmarked, heavier than it looked. The kind of card that didn't belong to any floor she'd ever cleaned. Above the elevator doors, the panel glowed with one destination. Chanel closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she pressed the card to the reader, stepped inside, and let the doors close behind her. The elevator was too quiet. Not peaceful. The kind of silence that had weight, the kind that pressed against your ears and made you aware of every breath you were taking. Chanel watched the numbers climb. 30, 38, 44. Her reflection stared back from the polished door's maintenance uniform, edges of her braids escaping their bun, eyes doing something between prayer and calculation. 47, 49, 51. She thought about Waverly's face when she explained special missions. The seriousness of it. The juice box salute. Undercover agent stay put. In 3 years, Waverly had never once stayed put. 52. The doors opened. The penthouse corridor stopped her cold. Not the design, though it was deliberately. Different from every other floor. No fluorescent hum. No industrial carpet. Just amber light that seemed to come from the walls themselves, and a silence so layered it had texture. What stopped her was the sound cutting through it. Faint. Unmistakable. The Bluey theme song. Hummed slightly off-key by a child who had absolutely no idea she was the most dangerous variable in the most dangerous building in Seoul. Chanel moved. One door at the end of the corridor. Heavy mahogany. Cracked open 5 inches. 5 inches of warm light spilling into the hall like a warning nobody had posted in time. Her hand found the door. She pushed. The sight on the other side didn't just stop her. It reorganized her entire understanding of the next 60 seconds of her life. Ryuk-shin frozen. Completely, unnervingly still. Hands flat on the desk. Jaw set. The most feared man in Seoul rendered motionless by a 3-year-old who was pressing a Hello Kitty sticker onto his watch with the focused precision of a surgeon and humming without a care in the world. He wasn't looking at Waverly. He was looking at the door. At her. The room smelled of sandalwood and something electric, the specific atmospheric charge of a situation that had already passed the point of being manageable and was now simply waiting to be navigated. 2 seconds of locked eyes. It felt like a season changing. Chanel broke first. Waverly. Steadier than she had any right to be. Come here. Right now. Waverly looked up with the expression of a child interrupted at the height of important work. Eye decorating, she said. I see that. Come here. He not mind. She gestured at Ryuk with the authority of a long acquaintance. He quiet. I like quiet people. Ryuk said nothing. Something moved across his face. Brief, unnameable, gone before she could classify it. Chanel crossed the room, lifted Waverly onto her hip, and turned to face him. Every instinct said apologize and leave. Fast. I'm sorry, she said. For the watch. Whatever it costs, I'll arrange. Sit down. Quiet. Absolute. The kind of instruction that didn't need volume. Chanel sat. The silence that followed had a different quality than the corridors. This one was active, full of something being assessed. Ryuk stood. Moved to the window. Seoul spread behind him 40 floors down. Indifferent and luminous. You were called in tonight for an emergency clean, he said. Yes. There was no emergency. He turned. The call was arranged. By my office. Chanel felt the floor recalibrate beneath her. Not tilt, recalibrate. Like the entire geometry of the last 3 hours had just revealed its actual shape. Why? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment, not the way the guards downstairs looked, scanning and dismissive, but the way a person looks at something they've been waiting on and are now confirming in real time. Because I needed to know if you'd come, he said. Alone. At midnight. No questions. I came because it was my job. Exactly. One word. carrying the weight of something much larger than she could currently process. He moved back to his desk. Saturday. Opened a folder she hadn't noticed, positioned too deliberately to have been left there accidentally. Her name was on the tab. The cold started at her chest and moved outward. You've been watching. Since your third night in this building. No apology in it. No hesitation. Waverly, entirely unbothered by the revelation dismantling her mother's sense of safety, produced the button she'd removed from Chanel's uniform and held it up for examination, pleased with herself, waiting for acknowledgement. Nobody acknowledged it. What do you want from me? Chanel asked. Ryuk looked at the folder, then at her, then briefly, with an almost imperceptible shift in attention at Waverly. I'll explain that, he said. But first your daughter needs to sleep. And you need to understand what's already moving toward you and why walking out of this building tonight without my protection makes it significantly worse. The word already landed differently than anything else, he'd said. Chanel looked at him. What's already moving? She asked. Ryuk opened the folder. Start here, he said. What's coming for me? Chanel kept her voice flat. She'd learned early in Seoul that showing fear was a currency she couldn't afford to spend. Ryuk reached into the folder, extracted a single photograph, and slid it across the desk. Chanel leaned forward. It was her, taken from above, grainy with distance. The 14th floor boardroom, 2:47 a.m. 4 months ago. She remembered that night. The smell, the careful way she'd worked, the decision she'd made in real time: see nothing, say nothing, be nobody. You knew what that was, Ryuk said. I knew it needed cleaning, and you cleaned it. That's my job. He studied her. Most people would have run, or taken a photo, or called someone. Most people don't have a 3-year-old depending on them to not make stupid decisions. Something shifted in his expression. Acknowledgement. The way a person looks when a theory is confirmed. He pulled the photograph back. That footage exists on 3 servers, he said. Mine, the building's main system, and one other. The third doesn't belong to me. Chanel felt the floor tilt. Who does it belong to? Someone who has been looking for a reason to create a problem for me. He paused. You are now that reason, whether you want to be or not. Waverly had fallen asleep. Chanel hadn't noticed it happen. One moment the child was investigating the desk lamp. The next, she was a dead weight against Chanel's shoulder, mouth slightly open, completely unbothered by the fact that her existence had apparently triggered a Mafia power crisis. Ryuk pressed a single button. A woman appeared, 50s, severe posture, face that gave nothing, who produced a soft blanket and gestured toward a leather sofa in the corner. Chanel hesitated. Nothing in this room will hurt her, Ryuk said. Not reassuring, just absolute. She settled Waverly onto the sofa, tucked the blanket, and turned back. The keycard, Ryuk said. Where did Waverly find it? Elevator bank on 14. Floor. He nodded slowly. It was dropped intentionally. By my cousin, Jae-won. The name landed heavy. He manages security operations. He's been testing gaps in my building, looking for vulnerabilities he can use. His jaw tightened briefly. He didn't expect the vulnerability to be a 3-year-old. He dropped a card that accesses your private floor, Chanel said slowly, to see who would find it, to see who would use it. If it had been one of my men, he'd have used it to prove disloyalty. If it had been an outsider, he'd have used it to prove my security was compromised. Ryuk's eyes were steady. He didn't plan for you. I'm just the cleaner. You keep saying that like it's a limitation. He tilted his head slightly. Tonight you bypassed 2 security checkpoints, navigated a restricted corridor, and entered this floor in under 9 minutes, to get to your daughter. Chanel said nothing. Jae-won has trained operatives who couldn't do that. Jae-won's operatives, she said, don't have Waverly as motivation. Something that was almost a smile crossed Ryuk's face. Gone before she could be certain. He moved to a panel on the wall. It slid open, revealing a monitor, live feeds, multiple angles. He pulled up 14. The supply closet. The trail of hair clips was still there, pink and neon against the gray floor. She left you a map, he said. She always does. Chanel's chest tightened. She knows I'll come. Ryuk looked at the screen a moment longer than necessary. Then he closed the panel. Jae-won will know by morning that the card was used to access this floor, he said. He'll pull the elevator logs. He'll find you. And then what? You become a loose end in someone else's story. Pure information, no drama, unless you become a fixed point in mine. Chanel looked at Waverly sleeping on the sofa, chest rising and falling, completely peaceful in the office of the most feared man in the city. She turned back to Ryuk. What does a fixed point look like? He reached into the folder and placed a single key on the desk between them. It looks like a different address, he said. Starting tonight. Chanel didn't touch the key. She looked at it the way she looked at everything in this room carefully, without betraying what she was thinking. You want me to move into your estate? I want you somewhere Jaewon can't reach before I've neutralized his move, Ryuk said. The estate has one entrance, controlled perimeter. Nobody uninvited has ever entered it. And in exchange, you continue doing what you already do. You see things. You say nothing. You exist in spaces people overlook. He paused. The difference is awareness. Knowing that what you observe matters. You want me to spy for you. I want you to clean, he said. Everything else is already in you. She held his gaze. What makes you certain of that? He reached into the folder and produced a second photograph. Same boardroom. Different angle. Her hands steady, methodical, working through a scene that would have broken most people captured from directly above. Because you've been doing it for 6 months without knowing it counted, he said. Chanel thought about the 14th floor. The decision she'd made alone at 2 a.m. with no information and no safety net. She'd assessed, decided, acted. The same way she'd been doing since Waverly was born, and the world suddenly required her to be competent in situations she'd never trained for. She thought about Atlanta. About Gerald Webb standing in their kitchen with that particular expression, the one that smiled at the surface and contracted everything underneath. She'd run because staying had stopped being an option. Seoul was supposed to be the place where nobody could find them. It had worked. Until tonight. If I say no? She asked. You go home. Jaewon finds you by morning. What happens after that is outside my control. And if I say yes? Waverly wakes up somewhere safer than anywhere she's ever slept. He glanced briefly at the sofa. And you stop working 3 jobs. Chanel's eyes narrowed. How do you know about the 3 jobs? He didn't answer. She exhaled. You've been in my file for months. Since the 4th week. That's a violation. Yes, he said. No argument. No justification. She almost respected it. Almost. I need conditions, she said. Something in his posture shifted. Barely perceptible. Waverly is not part of whatever this is. She's not leverage. She's not a variable. She stays a 3-year-old child. Agreed. I keep my own income, formal position, documentation. I'm not dependent on you. Arranged. And if I decide to leave, you won't. Chanel stiffened. That's not a condition. It's not a threat. He looked at her steadily. People leave when they have somewhere safer to go. You don't. Not yet. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her since she landed in Seoul. She hated that he was right. She looked at Waverly, the starred sheets she hadn't discovered yet, the rent payments she hadn't found yet, the medical bill that had disappeared like smoke 6 weeks after she'd paid the first installment, all of it waiting for her like a paper trail she hadn't thought to follow. One more condition, she said. The sticker stays. Ryuk looked down at his watch. The Hello Kitty face beamed up at him, pink, impervious, aggressively cheerful against $40,000 of Swiss engineering. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he stood. Get your daughter, he said. My car is downstairs, 2 floors below, in a private office connected to a secondary surveillance system Ryuk's team didn't know existed. Jaewon Shin watched the penthouse elevator descend. He pulled up Chanel's file. Then he picked up his phone and sent 2 messages. Find everything on Chanel Brooks. Atlanta. Immigration. The child's father. He set the phone down and looked at the elevator feed. Ryuk had just made his first visible mistake in 15 years. Jaewon intended to make sure it was also his last. Jaewon Shin did. Not sleep. This was discipline built over 15 years of understanding that the hours between midnight and dawn were where empires were either protected or dismantled. While Ryuk trusted, Jaewon verified. While Ryuk led, Jaewon mapped every exit. That was the story he told himself. The truth was simpler. Everything belonged to Ryuk. The territory. The money. The room that went silent when he entered. By birthright, by reputation, by the kind of cold intelligence that made men follow without being asked. Jaewon had spent 15 years being the second name in every sentence. He was finished with that. The response from Atlanta came at 4 a.m. He read it twice. Then he sat back and looked at the window for a long time. Gerald Webb, 32, Atlanta native. 2 prior arrests, both charges dropped. Currently employed at a private security firm with organizational connections, Jaewon recognized immediately. Connected. Resourceful. and according to the report, actively looking for Chanel Brooks and her daughter for the past 14 months. Jae-won read that line 3 times. A man with connections was already hunting the woman Ryuk had just installed in his private estate. A man with resources and 14 months of motivation and the kind of anger that didn't cool with distance. This was better than anything Jae-won had manufactured himself. He didn't need to destroy Ryuk directly. He just needed to open a door. He picked up his phone. Different contact this time. Someone with reach into American private networks. I need Gerald Webb to know where his family is. He set the phone down. Then he turned to the second piece of business, the governance board. He'd been preparing the formal complaint for 6 weeks. It was clean, precise, and constructed to make Ryuk's judgment look like sentiment dressed as strategy. He finalized it at 5 a.m. and filed it before sunrise. 2 moves, 1 internal, 1 external. He didn't need both to work, he just needed one. By 6 a.m., he was at his window, watching the city wake up. Ryuk had spent 15 years being untouchable, because he kept his world sealed. Nothing entered that he hadn't assessed and cleared. No variables he hadn't accounted for. Until a 3-year-old with a Hello Kitty fixation had walked through every line of defense he had, and instead of removing the variable, Ryuk had brought it home. Jae-won almost smiled. The Shadow CEO's greatest strength had always been that he felt nothing. It appeared that was no longer entirely true, and that was all Jae-won needed. Ryuk's estate was not what Chanel expected. Not cold, not deliberately intimidating, just quiet and settled, the kind of house that had been lived in by someone who understood the difference between power and performance. Long, private road, old trees, a structure at the end of it that looked like it had always been there and always would be. Waverly slept through the drive. She woke when the car stopped, looked out the window, and said, "Big house," with the calm assessment of a child who had already decided she approved. They were shown to a suite on the 2nd floor by the severe woman from the office, Mrs. O, who managed the estate with the efficiency of someone who had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. 2 rooms, both warm. A child's bed made up in the smaller room sheets with small yellow stars. Chanel stared at them. "Those were already here," she said. Mrs. O's expression confirmed everything and explained nothing. She left. Waverly climbed immediately onto the starred bed, pulled the blanket to her chin, and closed her eyes like she'd been sleeping here her whole life. "Special mission done?" Chanel asked quietly. Waverly didn't open her eyes. "I did good." Chanel sat on the edge of the bed, pressed her hand to her daughter's forehead. "Yeah, baby," she said. "You did." She didn't sleep. She sat by the window and watched the estate grounds in the dark, the trees, the occasional sweep of patrol she could barely see, thinking about the key card, about Jae-won, about a folder with her name on the tab that had been sitting in Ryuk Shin's office for months, about the starred sheets that had already been made up. He'd known she would come, not hoped, known, had prepared for it the way he prepared for everything, quietly, without announcement. She was still working out whether that made her feel safer or more cornered when her phone lit up on the nightstand. Unknown number. Atlanta area code. She stared at it through 4 full rings. Then it stopped. Chanel set the phone face down and looked at Waverly sleeping under the stars. Nobody had that number. She'd changed it when she left, bought a Korean SIM at Incheon, told nobody in Atlanta where she was going. Nobody except one person who had found it anyway, because Gerald Webb had always been precise about the things he wanted and relentless about the things he felt belonged to him. Her hands were steady. Her chest was not. She turned the phone back over and looked at the missed call for a long time. Then she got up, went downstairs, and found Ryuk in the kitchen. He was already awake. Dress shirt from the night before, sleeves pushed up, standing at the counter with coffee like a man who either hadn't slept or didn't need to. He looked at her face and said nothing. She placed the phone on the counter between them, showed him the missed call. Ryuk looked at it, then at her. "Atlanta area code," she said. "Unknown number. Nobody has this phone." He picked it up, looked at the number for 3 seconds. Then he set it down and reached for his own phone. 1 call. 4 words in Korean she didn't catch. Then he set it down too. "How?" she asked. "Jae-won." No hesitation. He moved faster than I expected. Chanel absorbed this. "He found Marcus. He pointed Gerald at you." Ryuk looked at her steadily. "There's a difference. Jae-won doesn't want Webb here, he wants the disruption Webb brings." "And what does Webb bring?" Ryuk was quiet for 1 beat. "A reason for me to react emotionally. which is the only version of me the board can use against me. Chanel looked at the phone, then at Ryuk. He's coming to Seoul, she said. It wasn't a question. Possibly, if J1 gave him enough. He paused. Did Webb have resources in Atlanta? Connections, she said. The kind that make problems disappear and reappear somewhere else. Ryuk nodded once. Processing. Not alarmed. That steadiness, the complete absence of panic, did something to Chanel's chest that she didn't examine too closely. The board meeting is tomorrow, she said. Yes, 2 fronts. J1 internal, Gerald external. Yes. She picked up her coffee, looked out the kitchen window at the estate grounds, still dark, guards moving at the perimeter, the old trees standing like they'd weathered worse. Then we handle the board first, she said. Gerald second. Ryuk looked at her. That expression again, the one that confirmed a calculation. You're not afraid, he said. I'm terrified, she said. But I've been terrified before. It doesn't slow me down anymore. He was quiet for a moment, then he poured her a second cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. The board meeting, he said. Here's what you need to know. The monitor room was behind the kitchen. No handle on the outside, just a panel that responded to Ryuk's palm. Inside was cold, light, and an entire wall of feeds. Shin Tower, the 14th floor, the boardroom, locations she recognized and several she didn't, restaurants, parking structures, a government building she was certain the public didn't know existed. She said nothing about those. Ryuk pulled up the boardroom feed. 2:47 a.m. 4 months ago. She watched herself work from above. Strange seeing your own competence from the outside. I found 3 things wrong with how my men cleaned that room, Ryuk said. You found 7. The grout. The furniture angles. The rug corner, she said. The light switch plate. The baseboard behind the credenza. The window latch, someone had forced it. And the waste bin liner had been replaced, but not the bin itself. He looked at her with the expression she was beginning to recognize. Confirmed calculation. He pulled up a second feed. Same room. 30 minutes earlier. 4 men working through the space in under 20 minutes. She watched them miss everything. They're trained to clean quickly, she said. I'm trained to clean correctly. Observation is a skill most people don't value until they need it. He switched feeds. This is from 6 weeks ago. J1. 14th floor corridor. Crouching near the elevator bank, placing the obsidian card on the floor with the precise casualness of someone executing a plan, then looking directly up at a camera he didn't know existed. He's mapped 70% of your system, Chanel said. The other 30 is watching him find the 70. She absorbed this. And the board complaint. When did he file it? This morning, 5 a.m. Ryuk pulled up the document. He's been preparing it for 6 weeks. Chanel read it. Clean, precise, accurate. Each point reframed to mean something different than what it was. She recognized the architecture of it, the way a person constructed a version of the truth that couldn't be argued with, because none of the facts were wrong. Gerald had been good at that too. He'll present me as evidence that you've gotten sloppy, she said. That's the narrative. Then we give the board a cleaner one. She looked at the monitor. You didn't get sloppy. You made a strategic acquisition. 6 months of documented observation. Demonstrated loyalty under pressure. A specific skill set your trained men provably don't have. She gestured at the split feeds, her hands and his men's hands in the same room. You have the footage. You have the comparison. You have the timeline. You're describing yourself as an asset. I'm describing myself accurately. She held his gaze. Isn't that what I am? Ryuk studied her. Then he reached across and set the 2 boardroom feeds side by side on the largest monitor, her hands moving with quiet certainty through the room. His 4 trained men missing everything she'd caught. The comparison was not subtle. J1 will have 1 more move before the meeting, he said. He won't come alone. Marcus. If Webb is already moving, he'll be in Seoul within 48 hours. J1 will use his arrival to demonstrate that my estate has been compromised, that I've brought a civilian with active external threats directly into my personal security perimeter. Chanel was quiet for a moment. And if Gerald arrives after the board meeting? Ryuk looked at her. Then he arrives to find that the woman he's looking for is no longer a civilian with no protection. He said it the way he said everything, flat, factual, complete. You'd handle Marcus. I'd make it unnecessary for him to be handled. A pause. There's a difference. She looked at the monitor. Her own face from 4 months ago, calm, focused, making a decision alone in a room that could have ended her. I was never invisible, she said quietly. You were just the only one paying attention. Ryuk looked at the feed for a moment. No, he said. Not the only one. The way he said it made her turn. He was looking at the trail of pink hair clips on the 14 feed. Still, there on the floor where Waverly had left them, a tiny deliberate map from a child who had never once doubted her mother would follow. Chanel looked at them for a long time. Then she turned back to the monitors. Tell me everything about J1, she said. Every weakness, every pressure point. His mother, Ryuk said. Start there. J1 moved on a Tuesday. Chanel had been at the estate 6 days. Long enough to learn the rhythm of the house when staff rotated, when Ryuk left, when the perimeter changed. Long enough to understand that Mrs. O watched everything and that the estate operated less like a household and more like a contained intelligence unit with excellent kitchen facilities. Waverly had adapted in approximately 45 minutes. She had a favorite chair, a running investigation of the garden, and a developing relationship with 2 perimeter guards who had made the catastrophic mistake of smiling at her on day 1 and were now committed participants in a daily routine of letting her inspect their earpieces. Chanel watched. This and felt something she didn't have a clean word for yet. The formal complaint arrived at 7 a.m. via Mrs. O, printed, placed beside Chanel's coffee with the efficiency of someone delivering information they found distasteful. Chanel read it twice. Jaewon's name appeared nowhere. His fingerprints were on every line. A breach of executive security on the 52nd floor. An unvetted civilian granted access to restricted intelligence. A minor child present within a high-security facility. Installation of said civilian within the director's private residence without board consultation. Each point accurate. Each point reframed. At the bottom, a request for emergency board review. In 2 days. Ryuk was already in the monitor room. He'd read it. She could tell by the particular quality of his stillness, not his default composure, but something underneath it. The stillness of rapid calculation. He filed it this morning. He said. I know. I read it. She sat. He has someone inside the governance board. Confirmed. The review was fast-tracked within the hour. Can you block it? Blocking it confirms his narrative. He set the document down. I attend. I control the framing. And me? A pause. That requires a decision. Tell me the options. 1, your formal staff. Documented, vetted retroactively. Defensible but thin. Jae-won dismantles it in under 3 minutes. 2? He looked at her directly. You're mine. Personally. You and Waverly. Under direct protection, which under the organization's code means untouchable by any member, including family. The room was very quiet. That's not a staff position, she said. No. What does it mean exactly? In their code, it means I've claimed personal responsibility for your safety. Anyone who moves against you moves against me directly. He paused. The board cannot override or investigate it. It supersedes the complaint entirely. And Marcus? If Webb arrives in Seoul while you're under my protection, it becomes an organizational matter, not a personal one. He held her gaze. He won't be your problem to manage alone. Chanel looked at the document. 14 months of managing everything alone. 3 jobs. 1 bedroom. A trail of pink hair clips on the floor of a restricted building because she'd had no backup plan and no safety net and had made it work anyway. She thought about what it meant to have someone who moved before the threat arrived. She'd been doing that for Waverly since the day she was born. She understood the math of it. If I agree, she said, I need the full version, not the one that makes it easier to say yes. Ryuk looked at her with something close to respect. It means your life becomes more complicated. People will make assumptions, some wrong, some not. It means Waverly grows up inside a world with significant walls around it. He paused. And it means whatever Jae-won found in Atlanta, whatever Gerald Webb is carrying it, comes through me before it. Reaches you. The last part was the part she hadn't expected. The honest part. The part that required him to say out loud that he'd already accounted for her history, her fears, the specific shape of what she was running from. The board meeting is tomorrow, she said. Yes. She picked up the document. Read Jae-won's careful, accurate, reframed accusations one final time. Then she set it down. Tell me everything I need to know before we walk into that room, she said. No gaps. Ryuk reached across and opened a new file on the monitor. Her name on the tab. Below it a second name. Waverly Brooks. Both files. Months of quiet, unsanctioned, absolute protection. Every payment, every blocked search, every wall built between them and Atlanta before she'd known the walls were necessary. "Start here," he said. The files were thorough, not invasive the way she'd braced for. Thorough in the way of someone who had identified a threat and removed it before it arrived. Chanel read quietly. Ryuk didn't explain or justify. He let the documents speak. First, her rental agreement. 14 months of payments that weren't hers. A shell company 3 layers deep dissolving into a holding entity she didn't recognize. "Fourth week," Ryuk said. "Your landlord was preparing to increase the rent beyond your income. You would have lost the apartment. So you bought the building." "I bought the landlord's debt. The rent stayed fixed." She thought about the month she'd braced for the notice. The 2 a.m. calculations on her phone. The relief when it never came, and she'd told herself she'd misread the situation. She hadn't misread anything. She turned the page. Waverly's medical records. The ear infection. The specialist she'd used a payment plan for $40 a month, 18 months. A stone in her chest every time she thought about it. Balance cleared 6 weeks after the second visit. She'd assumed an error, called billing twice. Been told each time the account showed 0 and there was nothing to dispute. She set the page down. "You should have told me," she said. "You would have refused." "Yes." Then, Waverly would have had a specialist you couldn't sustain. No apology. Just fact. "It wasn't your decision." "No," he said. "It wasn't." The plain agreement surprised her more than justification would have. He'd done something outside his jurisdiction and simply acknowledged it. She turned another page. A surveillance report. Photographs. A name. Gerald Webb. Her hands were very still on the paper. "He looked for you 8 months ago," Ryuk said, carefully. "Hired someone to trace your immigration records. The trail was blocked at entry point. Your visa documentation had been routed through a secondary registry that doesn't cross-reference with commercial search databases. You did that before you knew about. My organization owns the registry. Standard routing for anyone connected to Shin Tower staff." A pause. "It protected you without targeting you specifically. But when you found my file, I made sure it held." She looked at the photograph of Marcus, taken from a distance, him outside a building in Atlanta, phone to his ear, that particular expression she remembered, the one that smiled at the surface and contracted everything underneath. "The missed call 2 nights ago," she said. "That was J1 giving him the number." "Yes. And likely your location." She closed the file. "He's already on a flight. Landed 40 minutes ago." Ryuk's voice didn't change. "He's at a hotel in Gangnam. My people have eyes on him." Chanel absorbed this. Seoul felt suddenly smaller, the city she'd chosen for its size and anonymity, contracting to the distance between this estate and a hotel in Gangnam. "The board meeting is in 4 hours," she said. "Yes, you need me focused on that. I need you to know he's contained," Ryuk said. "So you can be." She looked at him. "What does contained mean?" "It means he can't reach you or Waverly today. After the meeting," he paused. "After the meeting, we deal with Webb directly." "How?" Ryuk was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, selecting the precise version of the truth. "Gerald Webb has organizational connections in Atlanta that interact with networks I have relationships with," he said. "I make one call. Webb understands that finding you was the end of the road. Not the beginning. You'd do that. I'd make it clear that pursuing you further would be professionally catastrophic for him." A pause. "Men like Webb respond to hierarchy. I'm above his." Chanel looked at the garden feed on the monitor. Waverly, visible near the flower bed, crouched over something on the ground, one of the guards standing 3 feet behind her, with the expression of a man who had been assigned the most important post of his career. "She doesn't know any of this," Chanel said. "No. She just thinks she found a pretty card in an elevator and went on an adventure." "Yes." Chanel watched her daughter stand up, holding whatever she'd found, turning to the guard with the expression of someone who had made a significant scientific discovery. 14 months, Chanel said. "I thought I was invisible. I thought I'd built something nobody could find." "You did," Ryuk said. "It just already had someone standing in front of it." She turned from the monitor. "Why?" she asked. Not for the first time, but differently now, with the files open between them, with Gerald 40 minutes away, with the board meeting 4 hours out. The real answer, not the asset narrative. Ryuk looked at the files for a moment. "You made a decision in that boardroom alone at 3 a.m. with no information and no protection," he said. "You decided something larger than yourself needed protecting, and you did it without asking what it would cost you." He paused. I've spent 15 years trying to build that quality into people. It can't be built. It's either there or it isn't. And you decided I was worth protecting because I cleaned a room. I decided you were worth protecting, he said, because of the decision you made before you picked up the mop. Chanel was quiet. Outside, Waverly was showing her discovery to the guard with complete seriousness. The guard was examining it with equal seriousness. A rock, an insect, something of enormous personal significance. After the board meeting, Chanel said, Marcus. Yes. And after Marcus? Ryuk looked at her. Something in his expression that she'd been watching shift incrementally over 6 days had moved again further from assessment, closer to something she didn't have a name for yet. After Marcus, he said, you stop looking over your shoulder. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she closed the files. Tell me about Jaewon's mother, she said. Everything. The board met in a room designed to make people feel small. Chanel recognized the tactic. 30-foot ceilings, a table long enough to land a small aircraft on, 12 chairs on each side occupied by people who had spent decades perfecting the art of appearing unmoved. She walked in beside Ryuk and felt the room recalibrate. Not toward her, toward him. Specifically toward the fact that he had brought her, that she was here at his left, in something Mrs. O had produced that morning without comment, clean lines, understated, the kind of outfit that said nothing loudly and meant everything quietly. Waverly was at the estate with Mrs. O and 2 guards and a full scientific agenda involving the garden. Chanel had kissed her forehead and told her to be good. Waverly had told her to be brave. Jaewon was already seated. He looked at Chanel once comprehensive, assessing then at Ryuk, with the expression of a man selecting the correct version of a prepared response. Ryuk pulled out Chanel's chair before taking his own. The room noticed. Nobody said so. Director Beck, 60s. The particular energy of someone who had outlasted 4 directors and fully intended to outlast 4 more, opened without ceremony. The complaint concerns a security breach on the 52nd floor and the installation of an unvetted civilian within the director's private residence. She looked at Jaewon. The filing party has the floor. Jaewon spoke for 8 minutes. Well constructed. Precise. Accurate in the way that a map drawn to lead you somewhere wrong is accurate. Every landmark, correct. The destination, a lie. The breach, the keycard, the unvetted access, the speed of the decision. Each point assembling a portrait of a man whose standards had softened into suggestions. He referred to Waverly as a minor child, clinical, deliberate. When he finished, the room held the silence of people who found the argument sound. Director Beck looked at Ryuk. Your response? Ryuk didn't stand. He removed a document from his folder and slid it to the nearest board member. It traveled the length of the table. 14 months of surveillance on Shin Tower maintenance staff. Standard protocol. What's not standard is what it produced. He nodded at Chanel. She opened her folder, placed 2 photographs at the center of the table side by side. The boardroom, his 4 trained men. Her. 4 months ago, a situation required immediate containment on the 14th floor. Ryuk said. My team addressed it. These are the results. The board looked. The comparison required no annotation. Miss Brooks identified and corrected 7 critical oversights my trained team missed, without instruction, without incentive, without any knowledge of what she was dealing with or who was watching. He let that settle. She then said nothing to anyone for 4 months. Director Bake studied the photographs. The keycard, Jaewon said, controlled. The edge underneath it barely audible. The breach was yours. The room shifted on its axis. Ryuk placed a second document on the table. Surveillance stills Jaewon crouching at the elevator bank, the card leaving his hand, the timestamp. The camera he hadn't known was there looking directly down at him. The card was placed deliberately by the filing party as part of an 8-month mapping operation against this organization's security. Infrastructure. 3 seconds of silence. I have 41 documented instances. Jaewon's face moved through something and controlled it. The question before this board, Ryuk said, is not whether my judgment is sound. The question is whether a family member conducting a covert operation against our own security warrants a response. He looked at Director Beck. I'll leave the framing to the board. Then Chanel spoke. She hadn't scripted it. She'd planned the shape direct, undecorated. The way she'd learned to move through rooms where being underestimated was simultaneously the danger and the advantage. She walked the board through the boardroom photographs, the way she'd walked through the room itself. methodically, with the precision of someone who remembered every decision she'd made alone at 2:47 a.m., with no information and no protection. She placed one final document on the table. 14 months of Shin Tower employment. Records. Access logs. Security clearances processed and renewed without incident. The full, unbroken paper trail of a woman who had been in this building longer than some of the people in this room and had never once been a liability. I have had access to every floor below 52 for 14 months, she said. Nothing I have seen has left this building. Nothing I have heard has been repeated. She looked at Director Beck directly. I understand that my presence here is unusual. I also understand that unusual and unsound are not the same thing. She sat down. The room was quiet in a different way than before. Director Beck looked at the photographs, then at Chanel, then at Ryuk, then, briefly, with the expression of a woman who had just finished reading a room she found more interesting than most at Jaewon. The meeting lasted 40 more minutes. Jaewon paused at the door when it was over. He looked at Chanel. Not defeat, not respect. The precise territory between them where a man recalibrates what he chose to underestimate. Then he left. His removal from security operations was formalized before the end of the day. His mother had been briefed the previous evening. Her response to her son had apparently been direct, thorough, and delivered at considerable length. At 6 p.m., Ryuk made a phone call from the monitor room. It lasted 4 minutes. At 6:17 p.m., Gerald Webb checked out of his hotel in Gangnam. At 8:40 p.m., his flight departed Incheon. Chanel sat with this in the kitchen for a long time. No confrontation. No moment of standing face to face with the thing she'd spent 14 months running from. Just a phone call. 4 minutes. A departure gate. She'd built walls across an ocean. Ryuk had made one call and turned them into a horizon. That evening he walked into the sitting room. Waverly looked up from her headquarters, drawings spread. Across the low table, garden rocks arranged in a sequence of obvious significance. Her bear occupying the position of highest authority. Ryuk crouched to her level, the most powerful man in Seoul. On one knee, in front of a 3-year-old who examined his watch with the seriousness of a conservator assessing damage, noted the lifting corner of the original sticker, and reached into her dress pocket. Fresh Hello Kitty sticker, pink, pristine, aggressively glittery. She pressed it over the old one with both thumbs, smoothed the edges, checked her work, looked up. Better, she said. Ryuk looked at the watch, then at Waverly. Something moved across his face, unhurried, unguarded, the kind of expression that had no place in the language of the world he'd built, where everything was assessed and managed and held at calibrated distance. He stood, straightened his shirt, looked at Chanel across the room and said nothing, said everything. 3 days later, he walked them into a Shin Tower board reception. No announcement, no explanation, no performance. He simply entered with Chanel at his left and Waverly on her hip, and stood at the center of the room while Seoul's most powerful people made whatever recalibrations they needed to make. Waverly identified the buffet table within 9 seconds and communicated her position on formal events clearly and without ambiguity. Nobody looked through Chanel. At some point, Director Beck approached. She looked at the watch 2 Hello Kitty stickers, slightly overlapping, cheerful and impervious against $40,000 of Swiss engineering, and was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Chanel. He hasn't taken it off. No, Chanel said. Director Beck considered this with the expression of a woman who had spent decades reading rooms and had just finished reading this one completely. Then she looked at the watch one more time, at the sticker, at Waverly across the room conducting a focused negotiation with a server over the acceptable ratio of desserts to non-desserts on a single plate. Good, Director Beck said, and moved on. Later. The drive back to the estate. Waverly asleep between them, bare under one arm, head tilted, the complete unconscious trust of a child who had never once in her life classified the world as unsafe. Seoul moved past the windows. Neon. Motion. Indifferent and luminous, and entirely unbothered by what had shifted inside one car moving through it. Chanel looked at the city. 14 months ago, she'd arrived with 2 suitcases and a 3-year-old and the specific, desperate optimism of someone who had run far enough to believe distance was the same as safety. She'd built invisible, carefully, deliberately, and invisible had led her through a supply closet, a trail of pink hair clips, a keycard on the floor of the 14th floor, and a Hello Kitty sticker on a watch that had never come off directly into the only place in this city that had been waiting for her before she knew she needed it. She looked at Ryuk. He was watching the city. the light catching the edge of his jaw, the watch catching the neon 2 stickers, slightly overlapping, permanent as anything in the world he'd built. He felt her looking, turned. The question she hadn't asked yet was somewhere in the space between them, about what came next, about what this was, about the 14 months of walls he'd stood in front of without announcing himself, and the 14 months of survival she'd built without knowing he was there. She didn't ask it. He didn't answer it. Some things didn't need language yet. Waverly slept on bare-tucked, mission complete. Absolutely certain the whole time that if you followed the pretty lights and pressed the sticker and trusted that someone would come, the story always ended up exactly where it was supposed to. Outside, Soul kept moving. Inside, everything had already arrived.